The air shimmered under the weight of the late afternoon sun, casting golden waves across the savanna. Dry wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of dust and sunburned earth. Daniel Harris squinted beneath the brim of his wide-brimmed hat, the sweat dripping from his brow mixing with the dust smudged across his face. The rifle slung over his shoulder felt heavier than usual, not from weight but from something less tangible, something that had been clawing at his chest for years. He adjusted the strap, wiped his brow, and knelt beside a set of fresh tracks. The soil was disturbed, the prints wide and deep. Lion. Big. Male. And close. He stood again, scanning the horizon. Silence stretched in all directions, broken only by the occasional call of distant birds or the rustling of dry leaves. He moved forward, careful not to snap twigs under his boots. Despite the heat, he moved like a predator, each step measured and quiet. He had come alone. He preferred it that way now. Gone were the days of organized hunts and radio chatter. Out here, it was just him, the rifle, and whatever he was hunting. The lion was supposed to be old, according to the rumors from the rangers and local trackers. They called him Mwamba, the Rock. Said he had survived things no animal should. Said he had eyes like a man's. Daniel hadn't believed it. Until now. He saw signs of a struggle, broken shrubs, blood on the ground, not fresh, but not dry either. Drag marks cut through the dirt. Daniel's heart picked up. His boots crunched softly as he followed the trail, moving past an outcrop of termite mounds and down a small embankment. And then he saw it. Near the edge of a half-dried waterhole, lying awkwardly on its side in the mud, was the lion. Daniel stopped cold. The beast was immense, his golden coat dulled by dirt and blood. One of his hind legs was twisted under him at a painful angle. His mane was matted, his sides rising and falling in shallow breaths. A thick snare wire was embedded into his flank, torn from some unseen trap, the metal biting deep into the flesh, now infected and red. Daniel reached slowly for the rifle on his shoulder. This was it. One shot. No drama. Clean. But the lion didn't move. Didn't even flinch. Instead, Mwamba opened his eyes. And looked at him. Daniel froze. There was something unnatural in that stare. Not fear. Not aggression. Just stillness. Like the lion had already accepted death and saw Daniel as nothing more than a formality. The hunter felt his finger tighten against the stock. He knew that look. He had seen it once in his son's eyes, in the hospital, just before the machines went quiet. He took a step forward. The lion's breathing rasped, labored, but the eyes stayed fixed on him. There was no roar. No growl. Just silence. Daniel's throat felt dry. He raised the rifle slowly, aiming between those unblinking eyes. Still, the lion didn't react. And in that moment, something inside Daniel cracked. He lowered the weapon. "What the hell are you doing, Harris?" he muttered to himself. The lion's tail flicked weakly, barely stirring the dust. Daniel stood frozen, conflicted. The hunter in him screamed to finish it. The man in him, what was left of it, was remembering nights beside his son's hospital bed, reading stories about lions, about kings of the wild. "This isn't about you," he told himself. "It's just a lion." But his feet moved anyway. One slow step after another, until he was less than 10 feet from the beast. The smell hit him first, blood, decay, pain. Daniel dropped to a knee. The rifle was still in his hand, but it now felt absurd. He looked at the wound. The snare wire had cut deep into the lion's side, tearing muscle and skin. Infection had set in. Without help, Mwamba would be dead within a day or two. Daniel exhaled slowly and stood again. "I must be out of my damn mind." He turned, jogged back up the slope, and disappeared behind the grass. Minutes later, the sound of a pickup engine roared to life in the distance. When Daniel returned, the truck bouncing over uneven ground, the lion hadn't moved. That stillness haunted him. Like the animal had already said goodbye to the world and was waiting for it to be over. Daniel parked just meters away. He jumped out, grabbed a tarp, some rope, and a crowbar from the back. Then he stood there, hands on his hips, looking at the lion. "All right," he muttered. "If you bite me, this'll be one short redemption arc." He approached carefully, speaking aloud as he moved. "Easy, big guy. Not here to hurt you." Mwamba's eyes followed him, but the lion made no move. Daniel wrapped the tarp under the lion's front paws and began pulling. It took everything he had. The lion weighed over 400 pounds, and Daniel's back screamed in protest with every inch. The mud made it harder. He paused, panting, sweat pouring down his neck. "You're a stubborn bastard, you know that?" The lion blinked slowly. Was that acknowledgement? With effort, Daniel finally managed to slide Mwamba up the makeshift ramp and into the truck bed. He secured him with the tarp and rope, not tight enough to hurt, just enough to keep him from falling if he stirred. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he looked back through the rear window. The lion's head lay motionless, eyes still open. Daniel didn't know what he was doing. He only knew he couldn't leave the lion to die like that. Not like that. He hit the gas and sped toward his ranch. The drive took nearly an hour, winding through back trails and dried-up creeks. The sun was low when he arrived. The ranch had once been alive with the sound of horses, of laughter. That was years ago. Now, it was just land, fences, and ghosts. Daniel backed the truck up to an old stable, abandoned but sturdy. He jumped out, unfastened the ropes, and with another agonizing effort, slid Mwamba onto the barn floor. The lion didn't resist. Daniel knelt again beside him, brushing dust from the beast's face. "Still with me, huh?" He stood, wiped his hands, and walked to the house. It was time to make a call he hadn't made in years. His fingers hesitated over the number. He hadn't spoken to Layla Makona since the funeral. Her voice on the other end was hesitant, then sharp, then quiet when he told her. "I found a lion. He's hurt. Badly. I didn't shoot him." A pause. "Is this a joke?" she asked. "No," another pause. "I'll be there in the morning." He hung up, leaned back against the wall, and stared at the ceiling. Out in the barn, the lion stirred once, just slightly. The stars rose slowly over the African sky. Daniel didn't sleep. In the early hours before dawn, he walked to the stable again. The air was cool, the silence deep. Inside, Mwamba lay still but breathing. Daniel sat on an overturned crate, the rifle across his lap. "You should have died out there," he said softly. The lion opened his eyes. "So should I." And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel alone. The lion exhaled, heavy and long. But then, without warning, Mwamba shifted, placed a heavy paw beneath him, and slowly, painfully, raised his head. Daniel froze. The lion stared at him. Then let out a low, guttural growl, not of warning, not of rage. It sounded almost like a whisper. A promise. Daniel didn't move. The sun began to rise. And the eyes of the lion, reflecting the first light of morning, didn't look wild. They looked ancient. The morning light crept slowly through the cracks in the barn's wooden slats, casting thin golden lines across the dusty floor. A soft rustle broke the silence, dry hay shifting beneath the slow, labored movement of the lion. Daniel sat nearby, a half-empty mug of coffee cradled in his hands, his eyes bloodshot from a night with no sleep. He hadn't moved much, and neither had the lion. But something was different now. Mwamba had lifted his head once, and it hadn't fallen back. That meant something. Daniel wasn't a vet. Hell, he wasn't even a man people called kind anymore. But he'd seen life cling to the edge before, and he knew what it looked like when it let go. The lion was still holding on. Against all odds. Footsteps crunched on gravel outside, pulling Daniel from his thoughts. He stood and stepped out into the morning light just as a gray Land Cruiser rumbled up the dirt path and parked near the gate. A woman stepped out, her short braids tied back beneath a red scarf, eyes hidden behind tinted glasses. She pulled them off and looked at him for a long second. Layla. It had been almost 3 years. I didn't come here to forgive you, she said. I didn't ask you to, Daniel replied. She took a breath, eyes narrowing slightly as she glanced past him toward the barn. Where is he? Daniel led her silently inside. The moment her eyes fell on Mwamba, her breath caught. She walked toward the lion, slowly, like approaching a sleeping god. She knelt, inspecting the wound with expert precision, her expression shifting from awe to concern in seconds. This wire's deep, she said. Tetanus is likely. The infection's spreading. If he survives the next 24 hours, it'll be a miracle. Daniel watched her work. She moved quickly, confidently, opening the canvas bag she'd brought. Syringes, antibiotics, antiseptics, gloves. He let you near him? She asked, not looking up. He didn't have much choice. Layla glanced at him, her eyes unreadable. And you didn't shoot? Daniel didn't answer. She injected something into the lion's side. Mwamba flinched but didn't resist. I'll need to cut the wire out, she said. It's going to hurt. He could lash out. I'll stay, Daniel said. Layla stared at him again, this time longer. Then nodded once. They worked in silence for the next hour. Daniel held Mwamba's front paws steady while Layla used a scalpel to cut away the dead flesh and remove the wire. The lion groaned once, deep and low, but didn't thrash. His strength was fading, but his eyes never left Daniel. By the time Layla finished cleaning the wound and wrapping it with gauze, sweat coated both their faces. I'll need to stay here, she said, rising and wiping her hands. He'll need daily injections, fluids, maybe a feeding tube. Daniel nodded. Room upstairs is clean. Take it. Layla raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She walked out into the yard, pulling out her phone. Daniel stayed behind. Mwamba's eyes closed for a moment, then opened again slowly. Daniel crouched beside him. You didn't bite me, he murmured. That's progress. The lion blinked. Guess you're not done yet either. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the acacia trees, stirring the dust. By evening, the barn had been turned into an improvised recovery room. Layla brought in portable fans, water tanks, a solar lamp. Daniel helped, wordless. The work gave him something to do, something to focus on other than the questions clawing at the back of his mind. Why had he really brought the lion here? What did he think would come of it? That night, as Layla cooked rice and vegetables over a small gas stove near the house, Daniel sat on the porch steps, staring out at the empty fields beyond the fence. The silence between them stretched, heavy but not hostile. She finally broke it. I never expected to see you again. I didn't expect to see a lion today. That's not what I meant. He knew. After a moment, he said, I couldn't pull the trigger. Layla didn't respond, but he knew she understood. She'd seen what he'd been through. She'd seen the fire in his eyes the day they lowered the small coffin into the ground, and how it went out weeks later. I think part of me died with Jack, he said quietly. And the part that was left. I didn't want anyone to see it. Layla's voice was gentle, but firm. So you disappeared. I didn't know how to stay. She stirred the food, not looking at him. Well, maybe this lion isn't the only one who needs healing. They sat in silence after that. The next morning, Daniel was the first in the barn. Mwamba's breathing had steadied. He looked alert, if still weak. Daniel placed a shallow metal bowl of water beside him, watching as the lion slowly lifted his head to drink. It was the first real sign of strength. Daniel couldn't help but smile. You're not giving up, are you? The lion lapped the water slowly, then dropped his head back down. Later that day, Layla returned with meat, strips of raw antelope from a local reserve. Daniel held one with tongs and crouched beside Mwamba. "You want to eat, you're gonna have to trust me." The lion sniffed the meat, then turned away. Daniel tried again, holding it closer to the mouth. Mwamba lifted his head slowly, then gently took the meat between his teeth and swallowed. Daniel laughed, genuinely. The sound startled even himself. Layla smiled from the doorway. "He likes you. He just likes the food." "No," she said softly. "He trusts you." Trust. It had been years since Daniel had thought of that word, let alone earned it. Each day became a rhythm. Layla monitored vitals, cleaned the wound, administered medicine. Daniel fed Mwamba, changed his water, spoke to him like he was human. They played old music on a speaker in the barn, soft jazz, classical guitar. Sometimes, the lion would flick his tail in time to the rhythm, and Layla would laugh. "You're taming a wild thing," she told Daniel one afternoon. He looked at the lion, who was now able to rise shakily to his feet, if only for a few minutes at a time. "No," he said. "He's taming me." Weeks passed. By the end of the third week, Mwamba could walk. Limping, slowly, but upright. Daniel opened the barn doors and watched as the lion stepped out into the sun for the first time since that day. The light hit his mane like fire. He stood there for a long time, head high, nostrils flaring, eyes closed. The wind caught him like it recognized its kin. Layla stood beside Daniel. "He needs to go back, you know." Daniel nodded. "I know. You can't keep a lion, Daniel." He chuckled. "I barely managed to keep a dog." They watched Mwamba explore the fenced area around the barn, stopping to sniff the dirt, paw at the ground, stretch under the trees. His steps were careful, but proud. "He remembers the wild," Layla said. "Does he remember what hurt him?" Daniel asked. Layla glanced at him. "Probably. But animals aren't like us. They don't hold grudges." Daniel looked down. "Maybe they should." The lion approached the edge of the fence and stared beyond it, out into the endless plain where freedom waited. Layla took a slow breath. "We'll release him soon. In a week, maybe 2. Daniel's heart ached at the thought, but he nodded. That night, long after Layla had gone to bed, Daniel returned to the barn. The door creaked open slowly, and Mwamba, lying in the straw, lifted his head. Daniel sat beside him on the floor. "I lost a lot before I found you," he whispered. "But you reminded me there's something worth saving. Even if it hurts." The lion stared at him. Daniel reached out, hand trembling, and placed it gently on the lion's mane. Coarse, thick, warm. Mwamba didn't move away. In that quiet moment, man and beast shared something ancient, something beyond words, beyond grief. And then, the night shattered. A gunshot echoed from beyond the property line. Daniel bolted to his feet, heart racing. Another shot, closer this time. He rushed outside, Layla already stumbling from the house. "Poachers," she gasped. "We need to hide him." But it was too late. Headlights appeared on the horizon, bouncing over the dry path. The sound of engines, 2, maybe 3. And Mwamba, standing tall in the moonlight, looked straight at the coming threat. He didn't run. He roared. A deep, defiant, thunderous sound that shook the air, and chilled Daniel's blood. The lion was ready. Daniel, less so. But he ran for his rifle. Daniel's boots pounded against the dry earth as he sprinted to the farmhouse. His hands trembled as they reached the gun cabinet inside the kitchen, yanking the door open with more force than necessary. Dust scattered into the air. He hadn't touched the rifle in months, since the last time he'd gone out expecting to shoot something and came home with a lion instead. The weight of the weapon was familiar and heavy. He loaded it with quick precision, all the while hearing the approaching roar of engines, the beat of tires slamming against uneven dirt, and above it all, Mwamba's voice. The lion's roar wasn't just sound, it was a declaration. A warning. A challenge. Daniel cursed under his breath and ran back out, barely missing Layla, who was stumbling toward the barn with a first aid kit under one arm and a flashlight in the other. Her face was tight with panic. "I counted 3 trucks," she said breathlessly. "Possibly 4. They're not from around here," Daniel muttered. "No one local's stupid enough to come after a lion like this." "He's not ready to fight, Daniel," she snapped. "He can barely stand for 10 minutes without collapsing. If they get close, they won't." A sudden glare of headlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the barn and searing the field in blinding white. The trucks had reached the outer fence. Daniel ducked instinctively behind a stack of hay bales and peered over the edge. The vehicles stopped with a jerky jolt, and figures spilled out, 5, maybe 6 men, armed with rifles and flashlights. They moved with precision. Not amateurs. These were professionals, hired for one thing, to kill. Daniel didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the bullet echoed across the open land. For a moment, everything froze. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then a voice called out from the darkness. "Give us the lion, old man. You've got 5 seconds before we stop asking." Daniel stood tall, rifle raised. "Step 1 foot past that fence, and you'll be limping back to your boss with 1 fewer man." There was silence. Then laughter. Cold, arrogant. Another voice. "He's bluffing. That cat's worth 20,000 on the black market. Probably more. Take him." They surged forward. Layla yelled something Daniel couldn't make out, but it didn't matter. He fired again, this time not into the air. The bullet struck the ground inches from one of the men's boots. The man dove sideways, cursing, and the others scattered. Suddenly, Mwamba appeared in the open barn doorway, a towering shadow against the dim lantern light behind him. He didn't roar this time. He simply stood, wounded but unbroken, head high, eyes locked on the intruders. He looked like something born from fire and vengeance. And that image was enough. The poachers hesitated, just long enough for Daniel to take aim at the tires of the lead truck and fire again. The tire exploded with a loud pop. Then another. Smoke poured into the air. "Still think I'm bluffing?" he shouted. One of the poachers raised his rifle. Daniel turned his sights toward him, heart hammering in his chest. But before either of them could pull the trigger, something unexpected happened. A low rumble. Another engine. Layla gasped. "Someone's coming." But this engine was slower, deeper. A single pair of headlights emerged on the distant ridge, coming from the opposite direction of the poachers. The men shouted to one another in Swahili, their tone shifting from confidence to uncertainty. One of them kicked the broken tire in frustration. Daniel didn't recognize the truck that appeared, but when it pulled up beside the farmhouse and the driver stepped out, he lowered his rifle slowly. It was Karum. An old ranger. Retired. Feared in his day. He still wore the faded olive uniform, the wide-brimmed hat, the belt with the old revolver. "You boys lost?" Karum asked calmly, his voice carrying across the field like thunder before the storm. One of the poachers lifted his weapon. Karum didn't flinch. He simply reached for his radio, clicked a button, and said, "Send them in." More lights appeared, this time from the woods. A second, third, and fourth truck rolled in. Rangers. Real ones. It had been years since Daniel had spoken to Karum, but clearly, some friendships had deeper roots than silence. The poachers didn't wait. They turned, scrambled into their trucks, those still able to move, and tore off into the night. One of the disabled vehicles was left behind, its engine sputtering like a wounded animal. Within minutes, the property was flooded with rangers, checking the perimeter, scanning the field, securing the barn. Daniel stood there, breathing hard, rifle still in hand. Layla finally touched his shoulder. "You called him?" she asked. He shook his head. "Didn't need to. I just left a voicemail. I didn't think he'd come. Layla looked at Karum, who was giving orders like he'd never retired. Apparently, he still believes in you. Daniel didn't respond. His gaze had drifted back to Mwamba, who was lying again in the hay, chest rising and falling steadily, eyes watching everything. The adrenaline crash hit hard. The barn door creaked as Karum stepped inside, removing his hat. That lion's got spirit, he said, nodding to Mwamba. So do you, Daniel. Daniel leaned against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up with him. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Karum chuckled. None of us do. But you did one thing right, you didn't let him die. Daniel looked up. They'll come back. They always do. But so will we. The next few days passed in a blur of repairs, patrols, and updates. The Rangers returned the following morning with welders and tools, reinforcing the outer fences. Cameras were installed. Karum stayed 2 nights before heading back, leaving behind a stack of radios and a list of contacts. But even with the extra eyes, tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to return. Mwamba's recovery accelerated. Layla noted the change with awe. It's like the fight brought him back. He remembered who he was, Daniel said. And maybe you did too. One evening, Daniel opened the gate. Just a crack. He stood there, staring out at the wild stretching endlessly into twilight. The sun bled red across the horizon, painting the grasslands in fire and shadow. Mwamba limped to his side, then stopped. The lion stared out at the same view. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to. The lion stepped forward. Just one step. Then he turned, nuzzled Daniel's side, and returned to the barn. Daniel exhaled, overwhelmed by emotion. It was not the time. Not yet. But the day was coming. He knew it now. In the dead of night, Daniel awoke to the sound of soft paws on the porch. He stepped outside, barefoot, and found Mwamba sitting quietly, watching the stars. He sat beside him. Why me? He asked the darkness. Why did you come to me? The lion didn't answer, but his presence was enough. Daniel stared at the sky, at the constellations he used to teach Jack before bed. And in that moment, with the lion beside him, he felt something shift deep in his chest. Something unfreeze. He wasn't whole. He never would be. But he wasn't broken beyond repair. Not anymore. The wild had come to his doorstep in the form of a wounded lion. And in saving it, Daniel had found something unexpected. The will to live again. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Daniel heard the faint rustle of straw from the barn. He paused mid-sip of his coffee on the porch, the mug warm in his calloused hands, and listened. A few seconds passed. Then again, the shuffle of weight, heavy and deliberate. Not frantic. Not pained. Just movement. Mwamba was on his feet. Daniel rose slowly, heart drumming not with fear, but anticipation. He stepped down from the porch, the early morning chill biting through his flannel shirt, and crossed the yard to the barn. The large wooden doors were slightly ajar, just enough for the golden light of dawn to sneak through and catch the dust dancing in the air. Inside, the lion stood tall. Not fully recovered, his hind leg still bore a slight tremor, and the scars along his flank were raw, newly closed, but his eyes were clear. Alert. Alive. Mwamba turned his head toward Daniel and blinked slowly. There was no growl. No display of dominance. Just that same quiet presence, like an old soldier finally remembering his rank. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. You're ready, he said softly. Mwamba took a single step forward, then another. He passed Daniel without a sound, like a ghost made of muscle and sinew, and walked into the open field. Daniel followed, boots crunching behind him. The sky was a watercolor of pale orange and lavender, casting the world in soft pastels. Mwamba moved with purpose now, not fast, but steady. He reached the edge of the fencing that had defined his world for weeks and sat, tail curled loosely around his paws. His mane caught the wind like a banner. Daniel stood beside him, resting one hand on the top railing. "I thought you'd never get this far," he said. Mwamba didn't look at him. His gaze was fixed on the endless savanna beyond. Layla joined them a few minutes later, holding a thermos and a half-eaten biscuit. She offered Daniel the biscuit, which he took without speaking, and leaned against the post beside him. "He's been walking the barn at night," she said. "Pacing like a caged wolf." Daniel nodded. "He's not meant for this." And yet he stayed. Because he had to. Maybe. Or maybe he chose to. They stood in silence, 3 silhouettes under the pale morning sky, 2 humans, 1 lion, all watching the same horizon, feeling the same slow pull of something larger than themselves. By midday, Mwamba had returned to the barn, but only to rest. He no longer curled up tightly as he once did when the pain was unbearable. Now he sprawled on his side like a king in his chamber, one eye lazily tracking the birds above the rafters. Daniel busied himself with fence repairs. Even with Karum's rangers having done most of the work, there were always weak spots, wires to tighten, posts to reinforce. Layla handled the garden and the animals, checking water supplies and inventory. Every hour, one of them would look in on Mwamba, and each time they found him stronger, more aware. But the calm was uneasy. That evening, just after dusk, the phone rang. Daniel picked it up on the 3rd ring. It was Karum. "They've been asking questions in town," the old ranger said without preamble. "Poachers, I think. Or someone working for them." Daniel's knuckles whitened around the receiver. "What kind of questions?" "About the lion. About you. Your farm." Daniel glanced toward the barn. The lantern inside cast long shadows on the walls. "They're not giving up." "Of course not. That lion's worth more than some men's homes." "So what do we do?" "You prepare," Karum said. "I'll send someone to watch the road. Don't open the gate for anyone you don't know." Daniel hung up and turned to Layla, who was already looking at him with worry in her eyes. "Trouble?" she asked. "Probably." She didn't press. They'd been waiting for this moment since the night of the first attack. The next few days passed under a veil of tension. Every distant engine, every creak of wood, every unfamiliar silhouette in the distance sent Daniel reaching for the rifle. Layla began locking the barn from inside at night, even though they both knew it would barely slow down anyone determined enough. Mwamba, for his part, grew more restless. He prowled the edge of the property now, sometimes disappearing into the tall grass only to reappear minutes later, eyes glowing in the dusk. He began roaring again, not out of fear or challenge, but ritual. Like he was reminding the world of something it had forgotten. Then, one night, Daniel found him staring up at the stars, tail flicking like a pendulum. "What are you thinking?" Daniel whispered, leaning on the gate. Mwamba didn't move, but his ears twitched. Daniel exhaled. "You miss it out there, don't you?" The lion rose, stretched, and walked to the gate. He didn't growl. Didn't roar. He simply stood. Waiting. Daniel's hand shook as he reached for the latch. He'd known this moment would come. Had both dreaded and prayed for it. He opened the gate. Mwamba stepped through. He didn't bolt. Didn't vanish into the night. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if acknowledging the weight of what was being left behind. He turned once, looked at Daniel, just a glance, and then walked into the dark. Daniel stood at the gate long after the lion disappeared. Layla found him there hours later, the rifle still slung over his back. "He's gone," she said gently. Daniel nodded. He had to. The next morning was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel moved through the chores like a sleepwalker. The barn felt empty in a way that didn't make sense. He'd had animals come and go for years, and yet none had left a hole like this. Mwamba's absence felt like a missing heartbeat. Then, just before noon, a truck arrived. Not Karum. Not anyone Daniel knew. The driver was a man with sharp eyes and a smug grin, dressed too clean for the countryside. Behind him, another truck followed, black, windowless. Daniel stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Can I help you?" he called out. The man raised his hands, smiling. "We're just looking for something that belongs to us." Daniel's blood went cold. "He's not here," he said. "Oh, we know," the man replied. "We tracked his trail." "But he was here, wasn't he?" Daniel didn't answer. The man's smile widened. "Relax. We're just businessmen. There's money in this, old man. A lot of it. You could be rich." "I'm already rich," Daniel said. "I just don't measure it in blood." The man's face hardened. "You don't get to decide how the world works. That lion belongs to no one. He's just product now. And product needs delivery." Daniel lifted the rifle. "You take one step closer, and you'll be crawling home." A long silence followed. Then the man stepped back, hands still raised. "This isn't over," he said. "You let a lion go that doesn't belong in the wild anymore. He's marked. Tracked. He won't survive. You think you saved him. But all you did was delay the inevitable." Daniel didn't move. The men left. Dust and silence remained. That night, Daniel stood at the edge of the property, watching the hills. The stars were brighter than usual. The wind carried a chill promise. And then, so faint he thought he imagined it, a roar. Not of fear. Not of pain. A roar of freedom. Daniel closed his eyes. Mwamba was out there. Alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough, for now. Days passed. Then a week. Mwamba didn't return. Daniel walked the same stretch of land every morning, scanning the hills, the sparse trees, the golden savanna that undulated like the ocean under the African sun. But there was no sign. No tracks. No roars. Not even a shadow. He told himself that was a good thing. But it didn't stop the ache in his chest. Layla pretended not to notice the way Daniel lingered at the fence, or how he never locked the barn, as if Mwamba might return and need shelter again. She kept the food bowl outside, near the gate, though she never said aloud that it was for the lion. Some things didn't need to be named. Their silence was the same. Not empty, but sacred. On the 12th night, Daniel sat by the fire pit, staring into the low flames. The air was still, the kind of still that made you feel like the world was holding its breath. Crickets sang. The occasional owl called out in the distance. The stars above stretched from horizon to horizon, infinite and cold. He took a sip from his tin cup. The taste of bitter tea and smoke was comforting. Familiar. "You know," he muttered into the night, "I never thought I'd miss the sound of a lion breathing." The wind picked up gently, curling ash into the air. Behind him, the dry grass rustled. He didn't turn. He didn't have to. The sound was too heavy to be wind, too steady to be a passing creature. But it wasn't threatening. It was deliberate. Calm. Mwamba emerged from the darkness like a ghost sculpted in golden muscle, his mane catching silver threads of moonlight. He walked to the fire and sat just out of its reach, his yellow eyes reflecting the flame. There were new scars across his shoulder, but they had already started to heal. His movements were slower. Not weakened, wiser. Daniel swallowed. He didn't speak. Mwamba didn't growl or roar. He simply breathed. And for a long time, that was enough. Then Daniel did what he hadn't done in weeks. He smiled. "I thought you'd gotten too wild for us," he said, voice soft, nearly lost in the wind. Mwamba blinked slowly. The lion didn't stay. He never crossed the gate. He never curled up in the barn or lay in the shade of the porch again. He just came when the moon was high, and sat with Daniel by the fire. Some nights he came with blood on his coat. Some nights with dirt in his mane. Some nights he limped. But he always came back. Until he didn't. It happened the way Daniel feared it would, but not in the way he expected. One morning, as the sun rose red over the fields, Karum's old jeep came rolling up the gravel road. It was rare to see the ranger during the day. Rarer still with urgency in his eyes. Daniel met him halfway down the drive, brushing his hands on his jeans. Karum didn't waste time. "We found something." "Where?" "Near the western ridge. By the dead acacia." Daniel's blood chilled. Was it him? Karum hesitated. "Come. I'll show you." The drive was silent. Layla had stayed behind, watching them leave with a tight jaw and eyes that said what none of them dared to voice. They reached the ridge before noon. Daniel stepped out of the jeep and immediately saw the vultures. They circled above a gully like dancers in a silent ballet. The earth below them was churned, clawed, as if a violent storm had erupted from beneath. Bones littered the area. Zebra, antelope. 2 hyenas, broken and twisted. But it was the center that drew his eyes. Mwamba lay still, his body partially hidden beneath a patch of dry grass. Karum stepped forward, then stopped when Daniel raised a hand. "I need a minute," Daniel said. The ranger nodded and stepped back. Daniel approached slowly, knees shaking. Mwamba's body was marked with deep gashes, some fresh, others long-healed. His ribs were visible beneath his golden hide. His eyes were closed. But it wasn't the wounds that broke Daniel. It was the position of the lion. Mwamba had died sitting up. His head high. His body positioned between the carcass of a young wildebeest and a half-eaten leopard. He had fought. And he had won. But the cost had been everything. Daniel knelt beside him. He didn't cry. He didn't touch the body. He just sat. And remembered. The wounded lion crawling from the dust. The way he refused to die. The trust he had given freely. The nights by the fire. Daniel finally whispered, "You didn't die like an animal." He looked up at the sky. It was pale and merciless. The vultures had stopped circling. Even they understood. "You died like a king." They buried Mwamba near the ridge, beneath the acacia that had withstood decades of storms. Karum helped build a cairn of stones over the grave. Layla came later, carrying a small wooden carving she had made by hand. She placed it on top, a lion, mane carved from olive wood, eyes made of amber glass. Life on the farm continued. The wind still sang through the grass. The cattle still needed feeding. The fences still broke. But something had shifted. People came. Visitors from nearby villages. Children, elders, travelers. They came to hear the story. They came to see where the lion had lived. Daniel never charged them. He sat on the porch, telling the tale over and over again. Of a lion who defied death. Of a man who opened a gate. Of nights spent in silence, beside a fire. And of the roar that once shook the stars. The story grew. Spread. Became legend. They called him Mwamba, the Lion of the Flame. And though his body was gone, his spirit lingered, in the wind, in the dust, in the eyes of every creature that dared to fight one more day. Sometimes, late at night, Daniel would stand at the fence. He'd look out at the hills and listen. He never heard another roar. But sometimes, just sometimes, he'd feel a presence in the darkness. Not fear. Not pain. Just the weight of something wild, and noble, and free. And he'd smile. Because he knew. Mwamba was home.